Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I'm your host Eric Smith, and today I'm talking about The Dollhouse by Edward Lee. And this is from Necro Publications, just a little tiny book here. And this is the story of Reginald Limpton. And he is a collector of dollhouses, and there's a rare patent dollhouse. Yeah, read the book, you'll find out what's so special about a patent dollhouse. But anyway, it comes on the market, and Reginald Limpton will do whatever it takes to get it. And it's an Edward Lee story, so things get a little wild. In the preface to this little tiny book, Edward Lee talks about how much he likes the work of M.R. James. And so this is his homage to those works of M.R. James. He's done this with Lovecraft. I have a video where I talked about that. 5 or 6 books that he did that were all either pastiches of Lovecraft, sequels to Lovecraft, simply inspired by Lovecraft. They were all a bit different and all amazing, and now he's decided to go with M.R. James. And what I love about this, and what works so well with his Lovecraftian books, is you have this Victorian horror story written in that Victorian style, but with Edward Lee, I don't want to say tropes. Edward Lee, I can't say style because it's M.R. James style. It's just very Edward Leean. And so, again, the story, it's Reginald Limpton is our main character, and he's just a douchebag. He's this fat, older guy with a beautiful wife, sexually active wife, and yet he treats her like crap. He's always staring at the neighbor's daughter. And he'd rather fantasize about her or play with his dollhouses than pay any attention to his wife. And so this rare dollhouse comes on the market. He gets notice of it. It's going to go up for auction, but he has a chance to lay claim to it before it goes up for auction. And so he goes to see the house, the dollhouse, and from there things get really, really weird, really, really disgusting, because it's Edward Lee in that good, fun Edward Lee way. And it's such a quick, tiny little book. I don't want to give away any of the details of what happens. But again, just this mashup of this Victorian horror story, and he really does, Lee really does capture the feeling of reading an M.R. James story. And I guess the best way to put it, if you're a fan of Edward Lee, if you know anything about his typical storytelling, imagine, well, this is what I thought of. Imagine you're reading The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, but after the narrator murders his victim, but before he buries the heart under the floorboards, he has sex with it. The heart, that is. And probably the corpse, too, after he's cut the heart out. But that's what you've got here. You've got this weird mashup of classic lyrical prose with some of the most disturbing and disgusting imagery. And the creepiness is both M.R. James and Edward Lee, despite, I don't know if people write off Edward Lee as just that over-the-top gross guy, but he's actually an amazing storyteller. I mean, real fans of Edward Lee know this. He's an amazing storyteller with great style. And as over-the-top and disturbing as his work can be, it can also be quite chilling. Some of my favorite Lee books are so far over the top that they're funny to me anyway. I mean, you have to laugh when it's so outrageous, and yet some of them still have that boundary pushing sex and violence, and yet they're incredibly chilling and very frightening and not at all funny. And this kind of falls in between, because there is this sort of break in my head anyway, reading this old-fashioned style with this definitely Edward Lee flair to it. You could call it Victorian and Edwardian, I suppose. But it's really a very, very cool story, a very quick story. Let's see. Oh, look at that! 100 pages, right on the dot. A fantastic illustration for the cover, and obviously you can't see the detail, but there is lots and lots of detail inside this dollhouse. Again, I loved the Lovecraftian works he did. I would love to see more of this type of thing. Lee, just such a well-rounded writer, and he can go from one extreme to the other, and I like to see him do things that are semi outside his wheelhouse. Again, you've got the craziness, but the style is completely different. So anyway, my rating. I wasn't going to try to draw a dollhouse. It would have been pathetic. So when I think of dollhouses, I go back to, I believe it was Fisher-Price, had these little people. You'll see what I'm talking about. Maybe it'll look familiar. And I looked online just to find some, so I'd have something to work on when I did my little drawings. And somebody made monster versions. So I just decided to go, this is Fisher-Price Little People. It's a Dracula, 5 out of 5. Little Fisher-Price Dracula Little People things. These things were made of wood bases and plastic heads. And I just thought the Dracula looked kind of cool. But 5 out of 5 is the important thing. Just, again, an amazing, bizarre mashup of M.R. James and Edward Lee. Such a well-told story. It's such a dichotomy. The style of M.R. James with the story elements of Edward Lee. It doesn't seem like it would work, but it does. And believe me, it is definitely over the top and disgusting. So don't expect a typical Victorian type of story, even though that's the style it's written in. But it's Edward Lee. If you're an Edward Lee fan, you're going to want to read this. I'm surprised you haven't already. Come on, what's wrong with you? I can't even say that. I'm so far behind on everything. I have at least half a dozen Edward Lee books I haven't read yet. But yeah, if you're an Edward Lee fan, you're going to want to read this. If you're a fan of... it's tough to recommend it outright because it is extreme horror. And I know some people aren't necessarily into that. But this might not be a bad place to start. Just dip your toe in. And it does get 5 out of 5. Little People Draculas. So, it's got to be good. So that's The Dollhouse by Edward Lee, his tribute to M.R. James. I'll have 1 or 2 links for this book in the description below, as I always do, except for the one time I forgot. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put them in the comments below. We can talk about your favorite Edward Lee books or your favorite old-timey horror authors. And please like, share, and subscribe. Oh, I forgot. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning first. We try to be polite here at the Low Budget Review Show. Now, please like, share, and subscribe. And that's it for this episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I have been your host, Eric Smith. And until next time, read more books.